That's a good start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Healthier Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. May I welcome all the committee members and the officers and our external speakers for coming in, and thank you for giving up your time today. The meeting is being webcast. Can I therefore please ask that any mobile phones are put into silent mode or switched off, and when you are asking a question or giving an answer, please use the microphones. As a council, we welcome the use of Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm I haven't received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today, and therefore the meeting is going to be conducted in English only. Can I also please remind members to sign the attendance register, and I'll now ask Geraint to confirm if we've received any apologies for today's meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Sue Molson.
Thank you, Geraint. Next, declarations of interest. Could I ask, please, if any members should have any declarations of interest, they declare them now, and also record them on the declaration of interest form.
I'd like to declare that my mum is a support worker for ISS Healthcare.
Thank you. Just please note that in the form as well. Thank you very much. Any further declarations? No? The next item is to review the minutes of the meeting that the committee held back on the 7th of January. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the meeting held on 7th of Jan, where the committee scrutinised the CIW Findings Action Plan. Could I please ask members to scan through the minutes of the meeting for accuracy, confirm they're an accurate account of the meeting, or raise any issues that they've got at this juncture.
Can I move the minutes on the basis no one responded?
Yes, thank you. I believe there was one small item that was brought up earlier with regards to the recommendation number 3. There was a question asked whether, although we haven't had the feedback yet from the recommendations, there was a question asked about whether previous training that had been undertaken by elected members was taken into consideration with regards to the overall safeguarding training. So I think that was the only thing on that, Beck.
Yeah, obviously with regard to the response to recommendations, the last meeting was only 2 weeks ago, so the return for those isn't for another week or so yet. But I don't know whether, Jill, you can answer that with regard to the safeguarding training?
If you add that to the recommendation, obviously I think it's due, the response back is due by the 7th. Yeah. I've asked for some analysis, so I can add that to the request and bring that, feed that into my response, if that's okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Rebecca, there's presumably no update on actions outstanding because it's too early yet. Okay. So for today then, we're looking at the progress of building the platform of the domiciliary care system and new strategy. The purpose of this report is to document the progress made in relation to the agreed actions, identify areas where progress has not been as timely as first proposed, and to highlight the additional challenges that have presented themselves since the last report. I'd like to welcome today Jill Pratlett, Head of Adult Services, to the meeting. I'd also like to welcome Mark Saunders, the Service Manager, Regional Commissioning and Partnerships, and Molly Curtis, Research Student from the University of South Wales. Could I please ask Mark and Molly to provide a very brief introduction of themselves and their background, and an overview, if you could please, of your involvement with the domiciliary care strategy. And can I start with Mark, please?
Hello, my name's Mark Saunders. I work for the Regional Partnership team. My role is to look at commissioning across the board. for the regional partnership team, and we've had a particular focus on domiciliary care, much of which is picked up in the content of the report and in some of the recommendations that you've made.
Thank you. And you, Molly, as well, please.
Hi, my name's Molly Curtis. I'm a research student at the University of South Wales, and I'm carrying out a research project to look at compassionate care from the perspectives of older people, carers and service providers. My project is part funded by Torfaen Council, and although I haven't been directly involved in the domiciliary care strategy per se, the results of my study are going to feed in to building the strategy to make sure that basically they're listening to what citizens want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. Thank you very much. Members, we've gone through the report at this morning's pre-agenda meeting, so I will be inviting members to go into their questioning, and Mark, you've expressed a desire to be able to be excused from the meeting, so what we'll do is we'll start with the questions that we had surrounding the regional issues, and then once we've I think there's only two specifically with regards to the regional issues, and after you've answered those, please feel free to leave the meeting. Okay, the first question we had surrounding the regions was from Councillor Crick. Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Thank you. Just reading this, it wasn't clear as to what the area covered by the region is. No, it refers to being sponsored by local authorities and regional direct payments, but it doesn't say where the region, how far it goes. Are you talking about Greater Gwent? Are you talking about the Health Board area? It's not clear from this.
Thank you for your question. The Regional Partnership Board is one of 7 in Wales that was established along Health Board footprints under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. Under that Act, the local authorities and the health boards in Wales had a duty placed upon them to initiate a Regional Partnership Board. So that is a statutory requirement. However, the Regional Partnership Board does not have a legal status in its own right in terms of decision making, and so therefore it undertakes various pieces of work which were in the Act. So an example of that would be, not relevant for this meeting of course, the work around pool funds for care homes, the regional contract for care homes, and various other bits and pieces in terms of children's services. But also the Regional Partnership Board is then at liberty to create its own strategy. And one of the main pieces of work, one of its main priorities, has been for domiciliary care.
Fine, thank you very much.
With regards to the regional workings, Mark, it was mentioned a workshop would be held early in January 2020 to drill down further into these contributions. Has this workshop been held, and what were the outcomes?
We had a meeting yesterday, as it happens, with the domiciliary care service providers in the region, and we went through the findings of the market position statement, which is referred to in here, with a view to test out whether or not the recommendations that were coming through in the market position statement was indeed what they thought. And so therefore we have had that meeting, so yes, that's taken place. And what was said in the meeting was pretty much confirmed the areas in the market position statement. So for example, there was a question around patch-based commissioning, which is a subject of this, and there are some providers in Wales who are not supportive of that. But all the providers which were at the meeting, which was over 25% of them from Greater Gwent, many of them from Torfaen, were very much in favour of moving towards that approach in terms of commissioning. as an example. There were other areas which I can go into if you like.
Thank you very much, Mark. I think those were the only questions we had, unless any other members have come up with anything else specifically for Mark on a regional aspect. Jill?
Apologies, Chair, but I'm just checking because as Mark's in the room, he's probably got that knowledge. If there was anything around some of the work with the schools and the colleges, some of that work has been taken up by the team as well. So I didn't know whether there was any specific questions that you had around those pieces of work. So I'll be quite happy to answer anything that's put my way. But if Mark may have some additional knowledge.
I feel in light of that, then Mark, give you the opportunity to respond and provide some additional commentary around that, please, if you can.
Thank you for the opportunity to make some additional commentary. I will talk, hopefully briefly, about the work that we're doing to try and encourage new people into the domiciliary care sector, and also to retain the existing workforce, which is depleting, unfortunately. So in terms of schools, some of you will have been aware of the work that we've been doing with primary schools, and this one was done with primary school children, I believe, in Pontypool, which very much focuses on working in care. There's a whole programme of going into various schools and secondary schools, and now we're in partnership with the Coleg Gwent, and we've produced quite a fruitful partnership with those and lots of different work programmes, and I believe that was the subject of the members' seminar, which I didn't attend myself, some months ago. So that is in the public record. The other areas that we're trying to work closely with is the We Care Wales campaign, which is a national campaign, and we're due to have a new, so they call it a media burst, with a television advert and various measures in terms of social media, Instagram and Facebook, to promote the work of the sector. And then the other piece of work that we've done, I have some information here for members on that, which I will leave. And the other piece of work which I'd like to draw your attention to, the Magic Moments work, which some members may be aware of, that we've been doing with direct care staff. Often they feel their work is undervalued and not recognised for the absolutely critical work that they do, and so we've been trying to counter that message by working with them to ensure that some of the areas of work with individuals they've been doing is celebrated. And one of the other things that came out of the meeting with our providers yesterday was they wanted us to put on a celebration of achievement event to value, again, the work of frontline carers who really are delivering the service to our most vulnerable residents.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We did have actually some questions around recruitment and retention. Perhaps it might be worthwhile to ask those now, because I think it would be interesting to get your perspective on it in terms of whether these are specific to Torfaen or it affects the greater region as a whole. So bear with me just 1 second, I'll go through the list. And the first one was Councillor Rose Seaborn. It was question number 2.
Thanks, I totally agree with you. Having worked in the area for 30 years before becoming an elected member, I know exactly how valued carers sometimes feel, how they don't feel sometimes, so and how valid the work is. So I welcome this debate. My question refers to 2.1, page 3. 7 carers have resigned. Do we carry out a leaving interview to assess the reasons? And the lack of flexibility with the role. The lack of flexibility with the role is a key issue. Do providers still employ carers on 0-hour contracts? And is this something that we should be able to influence with the new patch-based model?
If it's okay, Chair, that's what I'll ask Mark to do maybe is make a comment about the external sector across Gwent and Wales about the zero contracts and what that's like, and then I'll pick up the other points if that's okay.
Okay, fine.
Right. In terms of recruitment and retention, it is a national problem, not just Wales. It's right across the UK. And the reason for that are many-fold. We've been doing a lot of work to try and understand what are the barriers for people to enter the sector, and also what are the reasons why people are leaving. We've also looked at the workforce in detail, and we know where the bulk of the people are currently working in terms of their demographic, their age group. Many of them are nearing retirement, which is a concern, and we have a bulge of younger people, but they don't tend to stay. We also have an issue in terms of students who have been at FE colleges not ending up in the workforce, and that is a big part of the work we're doing with Blind and Gwent. But in terms of recruitment and retention as being an issue, it is an absolute national problem right across. Of the 82% of the providers that we've surveyed all of them, 82% return rate, every one of them reported difficulty in recruiting and retaining staff. And the reasons for that are the lack of status, and that lack of status is despite the need for them to become registered and therefore a much more professional workforce. The rates of pay are also a large issue, and the cost of driving between calls is another large issue. But there are others, but they're the three main ones: the price, the image, and the cost of driving from call to call. And that is right across Gwent.
Apologies, Councillor Seaborn. I remember the first part of the question. I might have to be reminded on the second one. As far as the number of people who have left the service internally, yes, everybody is offered an exit interview. So we do encourage that. We can't force people to do an exit interview, obviously, but again, it's a bit of a mixture, really. Family commitments. People are, coming to retirement age. We do, we have looked at our own workforce profile, and we do have a number of carers who are coming to, even though we haven't officially got a retirement age as such, because we've had some carers that one carer retired this year, who I think was 71, so really, really positive, positive carer who did a fantastic job, and quite right, she decided, well, no, she's had enough now. So we don't stick to a age of 65. We do know that we have an ageing profile within our workforce. So there's a number of reasons for people leaving, but to say there is a message from our current staff, and that we pick up from exit interviews, that that sometimes our rotas are not family friendly, and that's around how can we look at being more flexible. And I think, and in the report, under 3.2, I think we mentioned that we are going to look at doing a survey with all our current staff to see exactly what is it about the shift pattern that is a barrier. What could we do to make that more family friendly? And we'll be looking at embarking on that piece of work later in the year. Sorry, there was another part to your question as well.
0 hours, do providers still employ carers on 0 hours?
Yeah. Internally we don't. Obviously everybody's on fixed term hourly contracts, but externally, yes, there is still when we've asked the providers, that is the position, that they still do 0 hour contracts. And I guess the other part of it was, will we be able to influence that going forward with our patch-based commissioning? When we eventually move into that patch-based commissioning, we will be looking at tendering and then having block contracts. The way that we commission care at the moment is on an individual basis. So this is what we're hearing back from providers, quite rightly. That just doesn't give them any stability. So if we start to commission in a more mature way around enabling those providers to have more stability, and then we would expect, we will obviously be looking as part of our working with providers, is for them to offer the same to their staff as well. Although we are hearing from some staff they wish to remain on zero contracts because it gives them the flexibility. But I guess at the moment, probably for 95% of those carers, and Torvine isn't unique in that position. It is something that's reflected right across the UK. But I guess for 95% of those people, there isn't a choice. So I think the flexibility is how can we build permanent set hour contracts for people, but with some flexibility of 0 hour contracts for those who want to keep on that level of working.
And if I could just come in there, please, Jill, and ask a question. The report states that the current system requires the carers to work on a 3-week rota basis. Is that something that's potentially under review under the new model as well, to incorporate greater flexibility?
I guess my initial response to that is we don't know, because what we need to do is that piece of work with the workforce to say what is what are the barriers. So with any workforce we need a rota. We can't get away from that. But it's trying to understand how can we deliver a service that whilst we want to be flexible for the staff, we can't have a service that staff pick and choose when they are going to work, because we have to absolutely ensure that the right care is going to the right person at the right time. So that is a very tricky equation. And so until we do that piece of work with the staff to understand better about what works for you, what doesn't, then I can't answer that. Yes, there will always be a rota system in place. So whether it's going to be a 3-week rota, if I'm honest, I don't think it makes much difference whether it's a 2-week rota, a 3-week rota, or a 4-week rota. It's still a rota. I think that the issue is what does that mean as far as weekends, days off. What we can't do is then say for certain staff, well, we'll do it this way for you, but we can't, because it's got to be equitable. So if we do it for one, we have to then be able to do that for the whole of the workforce. Obviously, it's something that we would be engaging with the unions on to get there. We would have been engaging with the unions when we've done the draft survey to ensure that that's going to be okay to distribute, really. So it's an ongoing piece of work, and I'm sorry I'm being a bit vague in my response, but I can't tell you what that will look like until we've heard back from the staff.
Oh, thank you very much, Jill. I'm not entirely sure, but it may be useful to have Mark around just for the next two questions on the agenda, because they're both with regards to different regions.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, did you want?
Hi, I just wondered if time constraints with each individual client adds the stress for the people doing the job, because something might crop up somewhere and perhaps you haven't got the time for it.
Again, I can give you some general feedback of that from what we're hearing from carers. Again, across the UK, if you look at the UK HCA, which is the United Kingdom Home Care Association, I think it stands for, they regularly survey their members and get that feedback. So from a wider perspective, yes, I mean what staff are saying is they have a rota. They are allocated at the moment, kind of a time and task, what we would say. They're allocated half an hour to go to Mrs. Pratlett, and then they've got a travelling time which isn't, in their opinion, an appropriate travelling time till they've got to get to Mr Saunders, and maybe meet up with another carer there, because Mr Saunders needs the help of 2 people. So it is very much back to back there, and that is something that, that carers are saying that is very difficult, because we're human beings. We have good days and we have better days and we have bad days. And the way that our rotas are planned is that we look for the average. And again, that's a difficult one. So I think what we are certainly trying to do in our work, where we're trying to get to, in 18 months, 2 years or whatever, is around, let's get a little bit more flexibility in a community so people can go back and forth in a small geographical area, rather than having a call in Pontypool and then having to go down to Cwmbran. And so absolutely, I think it is very stressful for staff right across the sector, and that's something that we're very mindful of and want to address.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could I please ask Janet to ask question number 3 now, please?
Yes, Chair. Can you give us information as to why Gwynedd County Council was considered the best place to visit for best practice? How far in the process of establishing a new model are they? And also, why was Powers chosen to support a new recruitment strategy? We were of the opinion when we discussed this morning that the demographics in Gwynedd would not be very similar to an outcome in Torfaen.
First of all, we looked at areas all over the UK for best practice, and one of the reasons, so we've picked little bits up from all over the UK, really, kind of Wiltshire and some of their outcome work. Is a little bit of pick and mix. The reason why officers spent 3 days in Gwynedd was, as you members will be aware, we've done a lot of work on Vanguard, and that work has been focused on our patch-based teams, our social work teams, our assessment teams, whereas Gwynedd has done a similar piece of work with Vanguard, but working with their external providers. So our way of thinking about very much that client-centric, let's look at kind of what's put the person at the middle, make sure the bureaucracy is out of the way, all the principles that we've been working to within our adult services. That's what Gwynedd have been mirroring with the work that they've been doing with their external providers. So we were particularly interested, thinking, if we are all on the same page from adult social care and the external providers, ultimately that's going to give the best outcomes for the individual. So that's why we certainly spent some time, my officers did spend some time in Gwynedd to get that more detail. But say it wasn't exclusive, we didn't just go straight to Gwynedd, it was a little bit of pick and mix on that. The Powys work, again, it was looking across at different recruitment strategies, where it's worked, where it hasn't. I think in the appendices it was very much around, actually it's about the values of the individual. There is another piece of work, it was on top of that. So how do you take the values of an organisation and kind of convert that into recruitment strategy? And we thought the values work in Powys was very much where we wanted to be coming from. So we used that bit. And we also then, probably not in the report, we also, more locally, Caerphilly had done some, in the way that they termed it, speed dating recruitment. So again, we were looking at all different elements and seeing how can we bring something together for a better way of doing it for us. So it was a bit of a pick and mix and see what we can get the best from the UK.
We pick up the best of what they've got to offer, and they pick up the best of what we're offering.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Janet. I was just going to say we're trying to learn best practice from other authorities there.
The
Emma,
Sorry, the other point that I think you asked then, so how far are Gwyneth along the line? In the Appendix 5, I think it was, their Cabinet report, I think, which is one of the appendices, I think it highlights that they've been on this journey for about 2.5 years. So they've been working with providers for 2.5 years. They've just... this report would have gone, sorry, this is July 2019. Yes, it was Appendix 5. And in this report, I think it says that they've just opened their tendering process last October, and they are hoping to have some of their new contracts in place by April 2020, with a view to that new way of working over a transition period to be complete by October 2021. I think that's on the bottom of page 53. And what we've also agreed with Gwyneth, as you said, it is a bit about sharing. They are coming down and they're looking to see the work that we've done within the patch teams to learn from us, but we're also going to work with them to learn from their continued journey around their tendering process, about the appointment of the new providers and how they bed in and what kind of work that brings and what challenges and opportunities that brings as well. So we're going to continue with them on that journey for the next 2 years.
Positive outcome for your visit as well. So thanks for that, Joe.
thank you very much for that. You kind of answered the next question that we had when you moved on to Powys, but that's much appreciated. Mark, thank you very much for your input. I'll give you the opportunity to speak one last time. If you have anything else you'd like to say before the committee, before you go, it's not an obligation or a necessity. I just don't want you to leave here feeling you still had something that you wanted to get off your chest, but don't feel obliged to. But otherwise, thank you very much for your attendance today.
Thank you, Chair, and committee for inviting me and for the questions. I suppose I could add to the last question you asked around other local authorities and learning. There is another local authority in South Wales which moved towards patch-based commissioning, and we've learned a lot from them as well. And particularly, and Torfaen are doing what they didn't do, which is to put in some organisational development in terms of the sector and also the social workers who are making the assessments, to ensure that it is a much more of a gradual process and therefore likely to be more successful. So what we're trying to do, one of the roles of the regional partnership team, apart from this very bit of project work, is to gather good practice and to disseminate it through the partners. So.
Question before they...
Yes, certainly.
I just wondered, the council that you've worked with and consulted with, have they all sent their home care contract out to tender and are working with partners, or did some of them retain their service within in-house?
The in-house service is very much a mixed picture, especially within the Gwent region. So, for example, Newport Council do not have a general domiciliary care service. They have a reablement service, a specialised service. Caerphilly have the largest retained workforce. Blaenau, Gwent, Torfaen and Monmouthshire are more or less around the same, around about 10-11%. Well, Monmouthshire is quite a lot less than that, actually. So it is a mixed picture, and I think what's happened over the last 20 years, certainly since I've been involved in commissioning, is that most of those contracts would have been let on a block basis. However, not all, and sometimes a spot purchase arrangement, particularly at a point of transition, is a lot easier to manage than a block purchase arrangement. So I think it's very much where they are in terms of their journey. So, for example, in Torfaen's case, to move from a spot purchase arrangement to a block purchase arrangement would be easier than jumping from one block to another, which could potentially create a lot of upset. So it seems that much more phased approach, in my personal view, would be more sensible.
Thank Thank you very much, Mark. Does anybody else have one last question for Mark? No? Okay, thank you very much, Mark, for your contribution today and giving up your time to attend. Emma, do you want to take the next question, number 5?
Whilst the patch-based teams have gathered local intelligence to develop the strategy further, is there an overarching team that ensure the right services are moved to the right areas? Will this data be regularly reviewed to take account of the movement in and out of the patches?
Apologies, because I don't quite get. Sorry, can you just explain that a little bit more? My fault, but.
Well, the patch-based teams gathering local intelligence to develop the strategy. Is there an overarching team above that places the right services into the right areas?
There isn't. There isn't an overarching team as such. What we have is we are gathering that intelligence at the moment. So what we're doing is that analysis of when we are. What we have is a task and finish group at the moment that's kind of looking at that analysis and saying, okay, working through what should a patch look like as far as size, and taking into account some of that more robust information about is there any specialism, respiratory or whatever. We will then that will help us build our specifications when we're going out for tender. So it'll be something that we'll be keeping an eye on. But it will help us then kind of build whatever training programs we need for those carers. So if we then see something that's coming up, I don't know, in Blaenavon or whatever, we'll monitor that, and then we might be targeting training, additional training. So I think it's about just keeping an eye on that, because as we know, even just from the volume, we've had a 20% rise since last year. So things change, and things change quite quickly. So whilst I don't see people moving around the boroughs as such, there will be areas where we'll need additional training as we're going along. And our partnership, our workforce development partnership, actually works very well with the sector, and they do have a formal relationship where they would provide training.
Yeah, that's great. You just said actually when I was saying about reviewing it to take into account of the differences. So yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't quite sure I was on the right page.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Emma. Jill, just as a supplementary to that, well, obviously I can't preempt things too much. It's going to be looked at by the task and finish group. There's probably a lot more work to be undertaken in that. But one of the issues around this is obviously putting the right resources into the right patches so that you're effectively utilising the resources you've got to the best effect, and it's going to have impacts on current providers. Some might see their requirements for workload increase, others might see it diminish. One of the things that cropped up this morning was if one of the service providers felt it was they were in an area of a patch that was diminishing in terms of their current service provision, and they felt it was no longer economically viable to continue with that service provision, and the report does allude to the fact that there might well be some changes in terms of the service providers for domiciliary care. Is it the intention that the internal workforce of Torvine would soak up the requirement for the workload in that area, or is it envisaged that an existing provider would be given more work to cover perhaps additional area to what they hadn't previously been covering?
I mean, you're absolutely right in the way you've described that. It's complex. The way I think I mentioned it last time, that it was a while ago, that we have replotted what happens, what support is delivered across the borough, even down to every street, every house, and it's like Smarty Land. So we have 14 different providers, and we have that mapped out with 14 different colours, and as I say, Smarty Land, it's as if you've thrown them all up and they've gone all over the place. So there is no one provider that provides in one patch. So actually, that makes it complex as well. The other bit that certainly in our discussions with providers, yes, we know how much we commission, and we know we've plotted that out. That's absolutely great. That doesn't take into account any of the private work that each agency delivers. So there's another element on top of that. So we can't just, that's why it's really important, everything we do with the providers, because this isn't just about us, it's about establishing a new model that's sustainable, and it's not just sustainable for the council, it's got to be sustainable for the providers and obviously for better outcomes for the individual. So what you're saying about how we're going to manage that, that's why we've got to do this piece of work, and that's why I'm saying it's going to take 18 months to do this piece of work with the providers. Something that we've learned from a number of discussions, to say, with another local authority where they've said actually they didn't do that upfront work and it's causing problems, and say with Gwynedd where they have done that work, and that's why they're now in a position that they can move forward. Whilst, I am, patience isn't my middle name, and I do like to move quite quickly, I absolutely recognise that's not the right thing to do. We've got to work with the providers. We know, given there's going to be a mixture here, we will, at the end of this piece of work, come up with a plan of, we will want X amount of providers that we will be going, which will be delivering across certain patches, and that will be through a tender process. When we get to that position, before we will obviously be doing impact assessments. And when we do those impact assessments, we will say, okay, what is the impact around the impact assessments around individuals, because that will mean change of their care agencies or whatever, but it will also be the impact on those providers as well. So fully aware that this isn't going to be an easy journey, but standing still isn't going to be an option either if we're looking for sustainability. But so that's why we've also got to build in, say, this element of how do we, in our planning, how do we build in that element of the private work alongside it. But yes, ultimately, will we have 14 different patches that we will tender? I don't know whether 14 would be sustainable either. At this stage, it's really difficult to give you a definitive on that. But we know it's not going to be easy. Yeah, and potentially there are going to be some losers at the end of that. But we would do an impact assessment around that.
Yeah, I think the concern was to ensure that the model retained the built-in flexibility of resources to be able to accommodate the demand requirements, but I think you've addressed that. Did you want to come in, Faye, with something?
It was just a thought. Do the social workers and the occupational therapists and things ever meet the domiciliary carers, or do they just run along different strands completely?
No, they do. They do meet, particularly the occupational therapists, because any moving and handling plans and things like that, they regularly meet with the carers because they need some training on moving and handling quite often, particularly where there's hoists involved. And the social workers will also come into contact with the carers, probably more not as regularly, but they would have contact more with the manager around reviews and getting feedback around those care agencies. So the social workers not so much, but occupational therapists, yes.
I just wonder, would that be easier in a patch-based system?
Yeah, certainly. You may remember when I think I previously mentioned, but we tested out some work in North Torvine where we had a provider based within the team. So again, one of the, in the paper that went to council for Gwynedd, and certainly our experience from North Torvine, was that the providers that are working on that patch, they're not all the carers, but some of the carers, wherever they work from that office. And certainly the manager would be part of those fish bowls every day. So that daily communication about those individuals that they're supporting, that are part of that patch team, that you have that ongoing conversation, dialogue and communication, which from the work that we did in North Torvine was really, really positive.
Thought so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Janet, do you want to take the next question, question 6?
It's relating to paragraph 3, 1.2. The 200 hours of care that cannot be commissioned in any given week. This must be having a terrible impact on the services.
Apart from pulling my hair out. Yes, I mean, there was 200 hours when we wrote the report. When I checked weekly, I think currently we've got 230 hours that are outstanding. However, to put that in context, that's 20 people, 10 of those requests were this week. So it's a quick turnover. So when we say people are waiting, it's not people waiting in their homes with no care. So those 20 people we've got waiting at the moment, we have 7 of those I think are waiting. They are with the in-house team or the emergency care at home team. So they are providing care, and the term that we use, and sorry, it's probably not very nice, is to offload. So what they need to do is to find a permanent provider to take that care on, but those people are having care. We have a few people in hospital waiting care packages. We have 2 people who want to change provider. So we're trying to negotiate a change of provider, but when they go to that provider, then we should free up care elsewhere. We have 1 person that we are looking to support coming back out of residential care. I know that doesn't add up to 20, but that will give you the gist of that's how we are managing. So we keep monitoring that daily. What we're doing is we've brought our brokerage team, 2 people in our brokerage team. They are speaking to providers daily to ensure that that everybody is aware of kind of what care we're looking for. We bring the providers together once a month, or those who are happy to come to that meeting, and we have a little bit of a mature conversation about, right, this is what we've got, and I don't do the technicalities, but I know that basically you need to put a run together. So we have conversations about, okay, if I can take that bit and you can take that bit across the providers, we're getting a lot better, mature relationships, and certainly willingness to work together, and certainly to support us to support those people in the communities and people that wait in, really. So we are working with the external providers to try and get them to take more on board. We obviously, one of the big issues is recruitment, so it's recruitment for the external sector as well. So that's come as some of the regional work that's Mark's already covered to try and increase that. And we're doing obviously recruitment, the work that we've been doing for our own internal recruitment, but maybe that will come up separately. So.
Would it be better to say, because if anyone read that, they're saying that these people are not having care, that they're waiting for specialist care? Or more detailed care?
I wouldn't. There probably needs a caveat on that to say that there are not people that are waiting for 200 care hours that are having nothing. Yeah. So there are three cases that have come this week where a request for new care packages, but literally we're talking yesterday or the day before, and obviously when we are looking at allocations, if there are people without care that absolutely need care, they become the priority. And we also offer alternatives. Somebody needs a really big care package and we can't get that, obviously we will work with them to maybe look at just a temporary placement in the interim. If the risk is that great.
Thank you, John.
Maybe we're just noting that authority not far from here has 1,000 1,000 hours a week that they are trying to broker. So to put it in context, I wouldn't want to minimise it. However, say for those 20 people, 10 of those the requests have come this week. So it's that turnover.
It would be ideal if we could have a caveat to say, addressing the issues as you've for giving peace of mind to all of us in our wards, that if it was there, an emergency, it would be done.
Yeah. We say I can't magic carers, but we certainly would offer placements as an alternative. Yeah.
Veronica, did you want to come in with a supplementary on this? Or?
What concerns me is we're still talking about hours, and yet we're trying to move away from hours. And I just wonder how we get round that. The care that's required by people can vary so much. Whatever you do, you're going to end up categorising in some way. So how do you overcome that?
I think and that's exactly the piece of work that we're saying that we need to do over the next 18 months, because at the moment we have very much time and task. We haven't got anything as an alternative to put in place at the moment. So once we, even when you come to a block, as I would expect us to do at the end of this, to have a block contract for a in a communal patch or whatever, there would still be a number of hours. That would be, yeah. So the flexibility then would be how that provider manages those hours. They have, so basically we'd say you have, just as an example, you have 1,000 hours this week to deliver in this geographical area. And it will be for the provider then to work out what's best for that individual, to work with the provider to say, this is what's better for me. So you can have more of that flexibility of popping in and out. At the moment, we're still talking of incurrency of time and task, because we haven't got an alternative to put in place. But I agree with you. That's what we want to move away from, and that is the whole purpose of this piece of work, really, to get us to a different position. But that's where we are at the moment.
Because given the nature of Torvine, it's very clearly in 3 different areas, if you like. And the complexity and the age ranges vary to some extent, don't they? And that, I think, in itself can create problems. I just wonder how we're talking about not having silo working, we're talking about not having hours, and yet somewhere along the line they become quite important in their own way.
As far as age, I think that's why we tried to move away from a team that was 18 to 64 and a 65 plus. So we have moved away from that. As far as the work that we've been doing, that's identified here about where there are specialisms, that's purely to do with I don't think that's going to, certainly from my perspective, that's to ensure not to bring a specialism in, it's to ensure that the staff, the generic staff, have the right training. Yeah. So certainly the way that I look at it, I don't want people to be moved from one service to another. This is about having one service that will serve the needs of the community, but has the appropriate skills and training, rather than, well, we can't do that anymore, they'll have to go to someone else. It is about building up the knowledge and making sure that we've got that training plan in place. So hopefully the way that our approach is that we'll move away from exactly the points that you were saying. So we won't be siloed, we won't be looking around ages. I think we need to break down the borough into more than 3. It's absolutely more than 3, because of and we know that if you get a contract that's too big, it's too difficult to manage. So we wouldn't be looking at, say, 3 contracts or anything like that. So we do that, but that's the devil's in the detail, really, isn't it?
Faye, did you want to come in with something?
I just wondered, are there any people within the system at the moment who would move from us towards having continuing care from the health authority, and does that take the load off, and how easy is that to achieve?
I think we could probably do another whole session on that if you wanted. Yes, of course, there are, as people's needs do change, and we have a process, a process in place where we would assess that person with our colleagues in the health board, and we have a QA panel then that looks at that, a multi-agency QA panel that looks at those cases, and then the health board would then commission that care. In some cases, the health board may continue to commission the same provider. It depends on the level of need of that individual. If they need some real specialist input that only a nurse can do, obviously they can't continue with that provider. But there certainly are examples where if the health board are not, they have their own in-house team as well of carers. So sometimes their level of need is to extent that it has to be that in-house service that provide. The other point is it easy to, in some cases yes, and in some cases no. It's a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. I'm just going back very briefly to the 200 hours and task and finish, and moving away from that with the new approach to being more patient outcome focused. One of the councillors raised a point earlier this morning about the allotted times that domiciliary care workers have to spend with each particular person, and it was brought up that part of it is not necessarily just the undertaking of the tasks that they were assigned to do. It was addressing social isolation issues, and it was suggested that the domiciliary care workers, as part of their package, could act as a signpost or gateway to where the person who's receiving the care can access those type of engagements within the community. We're not suggesting that that is in any way a service provision that's undertaken by the service providers or indeed by Torvine, but just to be able to act as a signpost to those individuals who may seek information and greater awareness in those areas. Now, obviously, it's not going to be for everybody, but there are some that will, it may be that their only sole interaction with anybody is when the domiciliary care worker turns up that day for that allotted 15 minutes or half an hour.
I mean, ideally, what the model would bring is almost like a continuum of support. So you would have a domiciliary carer, and maybe you would have day opportunities, but it's rather than kind of separate services, it's about how you kind of build that pathway, if I call it a pathway, because you would then maybe, if you're working in that community approach, you may be from that provider have some flexibility. As I said, you have some people who have good days, bad days. So where you have people who have good days, it's fine if you stay and have that chat and whatever, but somebody might have a good day and say, no thanks, I'm all right. You can spend a little bit longer with somebody else having a cup of tea. But you can also link in with the community connectors. The community connectors will then build kind of what other activities or groups are there in the community. What other one person in the community has got similar interests that you can pull together. So it then starts to knit together as a little bit of maybe it's a spider's web or something, about how you then bring all those elements together. Is that going to happen overnight? No, but that's the vision. It's absolutely the vision that you use then that community focus, and the work that they did in Raglan, actually, quite close to home, was very much showed that, because the carers had a lot more autonomy. Yeah, they are the people that know the individuals the best. So they were obviously under supervision. You've got to have that governance arrangements, but they worked and they knew sometimes they could bring that person there and that person there together. So some of the time that they spent, they could kind of pull that time together and spend more time with that group of people. So that's ultimately the kind of model we're looking for, but say it will take time to, not just for us to get our heads around that and how we plan it, but with working with 14 different providers and 245 carers working differently.
Thanks, Jill, for that. The next block of questions we've got are around issues that were flagged up in the report surrounding staff recruitment and retention. So, Rose, do you want to take question 7?
Thank you, Chair. When new carers start, are they put with a member of a team who's experienced and therefore would help with gaining the understanding of why they love the job and what's kept them stayed in the role? And so using an inexperienced with an experienced worker to get that joy of the job, I suppose.
Yes, certainly you would not. There's a significant induction period, which any new member of staff would have to complete. But I think what you're talking, we don't have what I think probably you're referring to almost like a mentor role. We don't have like official mentor roles. But it's something, it's an interesting concept which I'll take back actually. But we do obviously have more of that informal. When people are being rotated, they will have lots of shadowing opportunities where they will be going out with a experienced carer. But it is something to think about, I think particularly around this new recruitment about mentoring roles, so thank you for that. One of the things that with our recruitment, we did have a number of people that would drop out quite quickly, and we discovered that actually part of it wasn't the role that they thought it was going to be. So certainly on the session that we had on the 21st, the recruitment session, I think there was about 7 members of our internal staff went along and talked a bit about the role and had those part of the interview process. It's a completely different interview process, but they talked about what it meant. So they were having those conversations up front, so people knew actually was it for them or not. So very much that early on. But that's a new thing for us. Yeah. But yeah, certainly something I'd like to take on board.
Sometimes it can be quite frightening, especially if you've got 2 new carers going to one client and never done before.
As far as the rotoring, we would never put 2 new carers like that. There's quite a significant, certainly probably a month of induction. Not just the training, but it's the shadowing with the experienced carers, and then the observation. Then they would then go out with one of the practitioners who would observe them. So it's quite a gradual process before somebody would then be going out on their own.
Thank you, Jill. You've quite nicely answered the first part of the next question I was going to ask, which was when a new carer starts, are they put with a member of the team who's been a carer for a number of years with a help to gaining an understanding of why they loved the job and why they stayed in the role? And then I've mentioned mentoring, so I think we've touched upon that as well. The next thing we had now is with regards to the dropout rates, and you've addressed that word for word verbatim, they left because the job wasn't what they thought it was going to be. So as part of the recruitment process, do we have current team members speak to them about the role? Well, you just mentioned yes, we have adopted that as a new approach at the last open day. What I would then go on to ask is, assuming that we've had individuals that have expressed an interest in pursuing caring as a career and they've attended the open day, wondered whether it would be possible to have like a workshop or something for those individuals to get more detailed involvement of the role, whether that would necessarily be a ride along for a particular one day with a care worker, so they could actually see the whole day and what the employee actually goes through. I wonder whether that could be something that could be looked at.
One of the things that we were trying to do with this new recruitment campaign, again hearing feedback from people who dropped out previously, the people who dropped out, maybe who had applied and then appointed and didn't start, was actually the process took too long. So in the interim, they found another job. Yeah. So really, one of the issues for this new recruitment campaign was we would squash it all up, basically. So from the session on the 21st, I've got hot off the press because I did this morning. There was actually 38 people that attended the event. They spoke about the role. There was people from workforce there was people from training there, and there was our own care staff there as well, so they could talk to everybody around that. They did the application forms that while they were there for those who were in. So after that conversation, some people said, "Thanks very much. I've had enough information. I might come back another time, but not at the moment." Other people were interested, did the application form, had that interview at the same time, and out of those 38, 13 people were actually offered posts, and 11 have accepted. We're still waiting to hear from one. So for those 11 people, this was on the 21st, so those 11 people that have accepted, they've already done their forms for the DBS. Yeah, we've supported with them with their requests for references. So we're looking at start dates. So yes, for those people who maybe want some more information, but I think the focus for us was, I'd say because of the feedback, is if I want a job and I'm interested, I want it now. Whereas, obviously we've got requirements for DBS and references and everything else. But what we're trying to do there, so that 11 people have accepted. The whole of last year, we appointed 15. So from that one session, we're still looking at that. So we're doing some follow-up on the people that weren't interested, those who are happy to engage with us, and why. And then obviously we'd be doing a more in-depth analysis of, so how many of those started, what's the outcomes of those, and then so learning from that really. But yes, we are following up, Chair, on why people didn't want to engage. So it might give us more information about, is it because they didn't know enough? Do we need to do some more work? But I wouldn't want to put another step in for those who aren't interested, because if they're enthusiastic and we can support them and they meet the requirements, obviously, then we would want to speed that recruitment up rather than slow it down.
Well, it seems that the recruitment event was very successful then in terms of recruiting that number of people, and I guess it helps you internally as well in terms of with the induction procedure and processes where you get a number of people starting at the same time rather than having 11 different individuals joining at completely different times of the year.
Swings and roundabouts on that. So we have to stagger that, ensuring that they all get the appropriate training and the observations and the shadowing. But absolutely, I think it's really very positive.
I just wondered whether or not we offered any perk to recruitment, and like we did with social workers a while ago, when we had issues with recruitment and retention. We actually offered to pay for their qualification as long as they agreed to work within the authority for X amount of time. I just wondered whether there's that type of offer.
Any requirements we pay for anyway with personal care. Yeah, it's like
registration.
well, at the moment we have just negotiated some funding actually to pay this first off registration fee for all our internal staff, but also for everybody in the for all the providers across Gwent. So for every single carer that needs to register because of RISCA across Gwent, we have agreed that we will pay their first registration because we managed to secure some grant funding for that through the ICF and the Regional Partnership Board.
Veronica, did you want to come in? I know you were down to ask the next question anyway about recruitment.
Yeah. Yes, okay, go on to that after that. I was just thinking when you were talking about this, and how you pick up on people, do you go to any of the groups like St John, who train people obviously in first aid and usually get them their DBS? Had you thought of going through them at all?
We've got our own internal systems for DBS, which it's quite robust.
You didn't quite understand. I obviously didn't express myself very well. In terms of recruitment, had you thought of contacting some of the local St John ambulance divisions to see if anyone was interested? It's just a different route of going through.
We've certainly, I know from the transformation team, the regional partnership, there have been a number of local events and Gwent events where we've put up stands and kind of publicised that widely. We haven't gone to individual organisations, and if I'm honest, that again, it might be seen as trying to poach staff. But again, it's not to be ruled out. But I think they're widely publicised through TVA and Gavo, certainly across Gwent, about some of the recruitment events. And I'm sorry, I probably may not be answering your question, but we haven't approached individual organisations.
Now, as it's a voluntary organisation and it also has a youth organisation, it might be quite interesting to see what response you got, particularly from the young
I'll certainly pass
on.
that information on to the regional team, so when they're looking at those kind of recruitment campaigns and some of the events, that they can certainly target
I've got the link now with the college. It might be as well to think of something like that too. Shall I go on to the next question, which was question 10, is that right? Because we dealt with the...
I'm sorry, Veronica, I had Faye down to...
oh, sorry, all right, so you want me to go back to the first recruitment event again?
No, I thought we'd covered that. I thought you had a supplementary on that.
Yes, well then you said, and I was covering the next one anyway, which is what confused me.
Oh.
Yeah, it's okay, that's fine. Faye?
I don't mind.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Recruitment to expand the service cannot progress until a funding stream has been identified. You have mentioned one bit of funding. Have we made any other progress on this?
Apologies, the one bit of funding that I've mentioned was...
For enrolment and DPS.
Oh yeah, the enrolment. Yes, I mean unfortunately there's 616,000 that we need to expand the internal service in the current climate, and we're unable to progress with at the moment. However, the conversations that we have been having some conversations with Welsh Government, some senior civil servants in Welsh Government. And we have another meeting scheduled, I think, within the next fortnight. So whilst we haven't secured that funding, I would say that the conversations are ongoing. Because, as you members will be aware, it's not the 616,000 is not a one-off payment. That has to be built into the revenue ongoing. So it is a significant commitment. But let's say that's not stopping us doing all the work behind the scenes, because it's all work that is certainly valued and needed.
Can I just ask you, optimistic?
Have you ever seen, all I can say is senior civil servants be really good at playing poker. They don't give anything away around that table. They haven't said no. So that's always a positive.
Rose, did you want to take the next question, number 11?
Yeah. And 11 is on 3.2, page 6. Engagement with trade union reps. You mentioned them earlier. Once you've formulated the plan, you will be consulted with trade unions. I just wondered why they hadn't been brought on at an earlier stage to part of the consultation process to produce the plan. And I'm adding this, Chair, have you thought of apprenticeship schemes that could help with recruitment? Trade unions often do a lot of work in that area.
The first point is actually we haven't got anything to consult on at the moment, so that's a consulting bit. But there's more about an engagement. The engagement bit, again, we need to be able to get to a stage where, because we haven't formulated anything, we know we've got 18 months' work in front of us, that we would want to then engage with the unions. The first thing we wanted to do, if I'm honest, is to get the recruitment, that first recruitment stage out the way, to help us with some of the immediate pressures, and so a lot of focus has gone on that recruitment day. So now that's out of the way, certainly the project officer is working on to now developing a survey and is going to engage with the union first of all about actually is that appropriate, and then to start to have that dialogue of what is our strategy and how we're going to communicate that. And so first of all, we needed to formulate in our own minds what are we going to communicate. Yeah. We're still in that little bit of we're not quite sure. So
my experience, thanks Chair, my experience on consulting on the Care in the Community Act was that trade unions took a lot of that on board and actually helped formulate that plan. And that's my point is, they can actually add something to something before it's formulated and consulted on. It's actually working. It's very similar to the DFGs when we had users in to look at what were the issues around disabled facilities grant and that.
No, I would totally agree with that, Councillor Seaborn, and say that's why we know we've got kind of 18 months. We're not in any position at the moment of having formulated anything, and I totally agree. We would want the unions to be alongside us as we're looking at developing that. And the second part was apprenticeships. Yeah. Whilst we haven't had that conversation with the union yet, there has been a meeting with our own workforce development and the training section, and there has been agreed that they would look at piloting one apprentice from about June or July this year.
Mike, can you take the next question, please? Question 12.
Jill, 3.2, page 7. This has been a difficult process whilst awaiting the guidance and the links to the regulations and inspections of social services, Care Wales Act 2016. There was a further meeting on January the 13th. Have we any update, please?
Oh, right, sorry. Okay. The meeting on the 13th related to a meeting with the apprenticeship scheme. Yeah. Which I just, and the feedback from that meeting on the 13th was an agreement that they will look to pilot one apprentice from June or July. So that's what the meeting on the 13th of January was, the reason why we hadn't taken it forward before was we were still waiting for the guidance, and I'm sorry that sentence probably is a little bit confusing. Because it was a recommendation from committee 12 months ago that we looked at that, but we weren't able to take it forward earlier because obviously we've got to ensure that we're meeting the requirements of the regulations. We were waiting for the guidance from the regulations, so it's only now that we're, in fact we've still got a few more questions, which is why we're not really going to look at establishing that till June or July.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next question, which I was tabled to ask, very conscious of the fact that we hadn't tabled specifically questions for Molly, and she's been sat there very patiently and quietly for all this time. So we do have one or two for you, Molly, but before we put them to you, do you want to give us a bit of a talk about what research you've been undertaking, how it'll help you, and what can be fed back and into Torvine's approach and the model going forwards?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So my research project was originally a Masters by Research, and I was just exploring the concept of compassionate care. My participants were older people, carers and service providers, and as Torvine funded the research project as part of the CES2 programme run at University of South Wales, I was recruiting initially in Torvine people receiving either residential care, nursing care or domiciliary care. So my initial participants took part in an interview, just asking what they thought compassionate care was and what it meant to them. And then I expanded the method to incorporate group concept mapping. So I have got plenty of PowerPoint slides if anybody's interested, and if you would like, I think they could be circulated through.
Send it to me and I will make sure that they're circulated.
Thank you.
I guess what Joe Newman is on the steering group. So Joe is leading, one of the lead senior officers, obviously doing this taking this forward, the Dom Care strategy. So some of the outcomes and the results that Molly is collating through her individual work and group work, that's what what's compassionate care. So we're taking that on board, listening to that around, because it is about how, we're looking what the needs of the council are, we're looking what the needs of the providers are. So it's about actually, yes, we are having what matters conversations from our own reviews, but this is a different element as well from Molly feeding in what people are telling her about what's compassionate care, because it's one thing for us to kind of understand what people feel about the care they're getting at the moment, but it's about planning for the future and what's compassionate care to them. And I'm sorry I've kind of talked over you there, Molly, but it's that's for us, that's the connection bit. So it's about hearing what people are saying, what compassionate care is, so that we can build that into any of our work. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you very much for that. Rose, you had that question tabled to come later on as question 24, the model taking into account assessing the person's needs, but it sounds very much from the explanation that Molly and Jill have just given us, then that's crucial really to delivering the outcomes if we want to move away from a task and time approach to a patient orientated outcome approach.
It's not very often that we have the opportunity where you've got a PhD student that you can tap into to actually give us all that wealth of knowledge and information. So it's been great.
Yes, Molly, please come back in.
I was just going to say what an important piece of work this is, because it is actually knowing what the needs of the client or the patient or the resident is, and actually knitting their needs into our service, not us knitting our service into theirs.
Thank you very much. I was going to say it might be worth adding that from the interviews and the parts of my project I've done so far, I'm finding things that are backing up what the domiciliary care strategy is saying, especially like moving away from time and task, because people are saying, I want more time, or I don't want people to come in and do what they've been told to do. I want them to do what I need them to do, sort of thing. So hopefully when I pull all the evidence together, they'll have an evidence base to back up the strategy. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask Molly, Jill mentioned earlier that there were just a couple of reported instances where there had been requests from individuals to change their care provision. Did you have any involvement in that at all, in terms of why they expressed a desire to move from one care provider to another?
No, I don't think, nothing that I've covered has kind of brought up why would they want to change. A lot of findings in mine were quite positive. It's like they liked the people who were providing care, but I think otherwise I haven't come across any reasons why people would change the care provider. Sorry.
I think that was one of the things that we were looking at the moment, with 14 different providers servicing different parts of the borough, and obviously then the other 10% we provide in-house of this overall service provision. If we're changing the models, it's got to be holistic and a consistent approach across the different providers, whatever the new structure and strategy is going to be. And I say 14 loosely, I know that number could well be revised downwards, it could change as we go forwards, but in terms of them having a buy-in to the process, it's going to be a big change management project, and we've got to secure that there's 100% commitment from the different care providers, and also that they can apply the new model consistently as well. Any commentary on that from both of you?
I think in the report I noted, Chair, that we've been really positive because we've gained, I think it's actually about £70,000 that I've managed to secure from external grant funding to work with the sector, and I guess that's around the OD work, organisational development work, that we need to support providers to want to express what the issues are for them, and then to come to some, some agreement and some principles and values of where that we all share. And so that's one of the things that we learned from all the best practice, that absolutely you've got to support the providers to get to that place, and it's going to take, it doesn't happen overnight. So the bit around, yes, you need the commitment from 100% of the providers. I can't ensure that we'll have commitment from the 100% of the providers, but what I can ensure is that we have given the providers every opportunity to engage, and we are supporting them to the best of our ability. If people don't want to engage in that, I have limited control over that, but I think our job is to ensure that we've given them every opportunity to work, for it just to work as a partnership, because it does, they do have to be committed to enable us to move forward. But so the initial feedback has been really positive.
Thank you, Jill. Molly, did you want to add anything to that? No? Unless any other elected members have got any further issues for Molly, I think we can thank you for your participation in today's meeting, and you can be excused now if you want to get away. Thanks, Molly. Yes, we wish you all the very best for your future studies, it goes without saying, and there's an enormous thank you for the hard work you've undertaken and the input that you've had in shaping the future strategy and the role of the care delivery in Torvide. So thank you very much.
Molly said that she's happy to share.
Try and get back on track now. I think we covered a lot with regards to the funding on question 13. So, Mike, do you want to proceed with question 14, please?
13. Page 3. The work of the GovTech may influence how and when we can take the work on, how patch will be figured forward, and can expand on this. Can you expand on this?
Do members know anything about? Apologies. It's a government initiative, and basically it's working with. We were asked, all local authorities across the UK, maybe we have an issue and a challenge that we are grappling with. So our challenge was, how do we work with an ageing population to support them using digital technology. The government then there was it's almost like a competition. So we were very fortunate to get through that competition, and we were then supported we then go out to the external sector, and we're talking about companies, worldwide companies, to say, this is our problem, how can you help us? And there is £1 million attached to this. So this is for these companies to, there's been probably 18 months' work of Jim Wright's time within the division, because he's been absolutely leading this, where they have to design something. This is something that they have to so they have to come up with something that's not there. It's not off the shelf. So we're saying, we want you to go away and think how you can help us, and they're going to do that design. So we are now in, I think, coming up to the end of phase 2, where they've been whittled down, and I think there's now, sorry, I can't remember if there's 3 or 5 candidates who will be presenting next month, actually, around phase 2. And then there's a big panel of people from government, technological experts and whatever. I'm not describing this very well, sorry. Jim should be doing this. That will then say, are these designs worthy of £1 million investment? So, what we're not quite sure of is, so what this is saying is, there might be something that comes out of that that's going to support the way we deliver care. At the moment, we don't know, because we have got no idea, because it's something they're looking at developing something that's not there. So it's a little bit of, and also, if these providers actually what they pitch for, we say actually none of that will support us, then they don't get the £1 million anyway. So it's not a given that they get the £1 million. So we just need to see what this initiative brings. So we're just very conscious that there might be something else that will go into the mix that helps us, that will then, we might have to tweak what we're doing going forward. That's the gist of that, and I'm sorry I didn't describe that very well. But after the next session, then there'll probably be a briefing that Jim does. So again, I can probably circulate that to give you a little bit more information, if that's okay.
And thanks, Mike. Thank you, Jill. The next question I've got is with regards to content of the report in 3.3 on page 5, paragraph 5, where it refers to the open book accounting approach, where essentially we're asking the service provider to share their information on their own costs with their local commissioners. Do you think the providers are going to be willing to do this with us? And if only a few of them are willing to work with us on this, how confident can we be of obtaining accurate information and feedback?
It's a methodology we applied with the residential and nursing sector providers. Again, it's what we agreed across. We invite the whole sector to be part of that. Some people choose to, some people don't. However, it's very clear in our engagement that any conclusions we come to as far as any modelling work can only be based on the information that we have. So, for example, we had maybe 7 providers in residential and nursing. So any work that we did, we would expect the other providers that they have to accept the outcome of that piece of work, even though they haven't been engaged in it. So it would be the same principles of that. Because where we're looking there around, it's kind of that it is part of the issue is we know from the provider sector is around the costs and the hourly rate, and we know that the majority of carers, a lot of the carers, not majority, are on that minimum wage. I mean, that part on the bottom of page 22, it highlighted that the UK HCA has come up with last year of an hourly rate of £18.93, and our rates, which are quite favourable, comparable across certainly across Gwent and Wales. We're not out of kilter by any stretch of the imagination. The £16.24. I know they've just recently. UK HCA have just recently published the new figure for the next financial year of £20.69. So we do need to work with the sector to say what is it, to get a better idea of what is a fair rate, which would, with all the best will in the world, if we applied that £20.69, it's additional kind of 1.3 million just for Torvine. Just to put that in a. I mean, I just did a quick calculation earlier when I looked at it. We're not in a financial position to do that, but we do. Again, part of the work that we need to do to providers is ensure that we look towards what a fair rate is. And to do that, we need some open book accounting. And the way that we check back on that, there are open. They have to do their accountancy returns as any other business, really. So whilst it's not about checking up about the accuracy, that's the way that we do it through accountancy returns as well.
Thank you. Faye, do you want to take the next question, 17, please?
17. Implementation plan. How often is this plan reviewed and amended? Are there any major steps that we are not initially included when the plan was first developed that should be? And do you think the timeline needs to be changed in any way? And this is in Appendix 1.
The Task and Finish group meet every month, so that's the way that we're monitoring that. I think in the report what we've said is the timeline as far as recruitment for the external work is very much dependent on, for our expansion of our internal service, is going to be dependent on availability of the money. So that timeline, yes, will change. It will move dependent on when funding's available. Some of the other areas, we're near enough on track with the other areas. So the work that we need to do with the external providers still has to happen, regardless of what happens internally with the expansion of the service. The work that we need to do with recruitment and testing out those new ways of recruitment, and so we've already had that positive experience. We will, continue to evaluate that. Unfortunately, we've already seen there's some turnover. We already have, an annual turnover rate. So we will continue with that piece of work. And now that we've done that groundwork, that'll be a lot easier. So I guess, yes, some of that may move, and it depends on the response from the external providers. So, yes, we're saying probably we need 18 months to do that piece of work. We have to go at through our support, but we have to go at their pace as well. So that might be a bit quicker, it might be a bit slower, but whatever we do, we've got to get it right for us all. And I say, as Mark mentioned, one of the lessons learned from another authority was what they didn't. They kind of tried to push it through, and then the providers disengaged. So if we're going to do this, make this commitment, because we've got to get the model right for the next 10 years, 20 years plus. We've really got to invest the right time to do it. So whilst, yes, we have to have a timetable, and we would want to keep to it, it's got to be, I'm not going to be dictated by the timetable, I'm going to be dictated by the getting it right, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Janet, I think you're down for the next question, question 18.
Again, Jill, it's on Appendix 1. The Domiciliary Care Task and Finish Group. Do you think that this group is comprehensive? And do you think that the membership should or could be expanded to include anyone else?
We had quite a discussion on that actually around when we were looking at the terms and reference and the membership. We didn't want to make it too big, because then you get a kind of almost like a death by committee and no progress. Sorry, I didn't.
You give me small and compact.
Yes, sorry, apologies.
Small and compact.
So what we agreed with, depending on the task at the time of the task and finish group, that they would co-opt members in. So it might be at some stage that they would be pulling people in around training, so that they would join that meeting. But it's as and when. So as we're looking at kind of what's up on the agenda, then we will bring alternative people in. Dependent on that, might be somebody from the transformation team, this particular area, but that's the core group.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jill.
I hope we're not giving you death by committee there, Jill. I do appreciate there's been rather a lot of us bunched up because of PERDA, but you'll be pleased to know that the good news is after today we'll have caught up in our cycle of meetings. That's the good news. The bad news is that the next cycle starts straight away. So Rose, I've got you down. We're just as an FYI, we're about 3/4 of the way through the questions. I think we've probably got 5 or 6 left. Rose, do you want to take the next one? So hopefully we should be on track for finishing the questioning session at 4 o'clock, and then members can make their recommendations.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've already answered question 24 when Molly was here, and there's part of this question now that's already, so the new structure, who's been consulted on the proposed structure? Has there been any objections or amendments to the proposal? And then the other part obviously we understand that the clients have been consulted with Molly, but how will we be advising clients of the changes when they are introduced? So who's been consulted and how will we let people know?
So as far as the new structure, nobody's been consulted at this stage because, one, it's chicken and egg stuff because we won't have that structure if we don't get the money. And we don't know whether we're going to get the money. The impact on the existing staff would be, well, it's an expansion of the service, so there'd be additional staff, so there wouldn't be any changes to their way of working. However, we would want to communicate exactly what's going on. Say, go back to my previous comment, when we know if we have the money, then we would be, making sure that we're doing that communication of what's happening, so the staff know. Because it's providing more security for our staff, so it's certainly no threat to our staff there. So that was the first point. The second point was how would we communicate to changes to clients. There would be a whole communication strategy around that. Again, we haven't given the thought or the detail to that at the moment because, again, we're talking, if we go out to tender April 2021, we'd be talking. But yes, we would, if we secure, when we are in that position, so we know kind of what tenders would be going out, when they would be going out, we would have a whole communication strategy around that, which we would do through one-to-ones, newsletters, group sessions. There would forums, the older persons forums, whatever. There would be a whole raft of ways of communicating there.
Can I just ask when we can expect to know about the funding?
I guess I'm going to be hanging on, hopefully, unless at the moment we haven't had a no from Welsh Government. So, and whilst we haven't had a no, I would be hoping for a yes. So I don't know that, but all I would suspect is from Welsh Government that they have their own deadlines about what's available and setting their own budgets, so they would have a timetable, but they haven't let me into that secret date.
Yes, Veronica.
Thank you. If that's the case, have you got an alternative thought about how you could introduce this to the current staffing structure that you've got?
Without that additional funding, no. There isn't a plan B for that. Fortunately, it isn't something that you could do on the back of grant funding, because we wouldn't put staff in a position of taking them, recruiting new staff and then not being able to sustain that, and then have to delete those posts. That's absolutely not appropriate. So as far as the expansion of the internal service, to say that unless that additional funding is available, there isn't a plan B. The rest of the strategy, yes, we will continue with that. Yeah. Okay.
And Rose, thank you very much for your participation in today's meeting. I know you've got to leave early, so thank you very much. Okay, just checking where we're up to. I think, Janet, you're next, aren't you, for the risk question?
Just a quick question to ask. Is there a risk that with the patch-based model there may be issues of inconsistency in providing the high care?
Yes, there is always a risk. However, I would suggest there's a greater risk of the current model providing greater inconsistency with 17 different providers that aren't linking with the patch teams. So in some ways it would reduce the risk, because in the new model where you have patch-based teams that will be engaging with, that you have the patch providers that will be engaging with the patch-based teams, having those daily conversations, you have more of an oversight of what's happening. At the moment, obviously, yes, we do have an oversight of what's happening through our commissioning teams and through our annual reviews, through our feedback from service users. But in the new model, you would certainly be enhancing that.
The next question was assigned against me, but I don't mind, Emma, if you want to take it forwards. Question 22, please.
Is there a risk that some providers may not operate in certain patches?
As I said, at the moment we've got that Smarty map, so most the 14 providers tend to operate all over the place. When we come to a position of putting whatever tenders are out, what geographical tenders are out, it will be entirely up to the providers whether they would bid for those tenders or not. Which I think it refers back to the earlier point of if I don't know at this stage whether there'll be 14 different block contracts. I think it's unlikely that we'll have 14. I think it's absolutely we'll have more than 3. But I really don't know what that optimum level will come out as. Better say it will be down to individual providers whether they decide to bid for those tenders that then go out.
Thank you, Emma. I guess it was slightly more pertinent to ask that question in Gwynedd or Powys, because obviously they've got far bigger geographic regions, and I think they'll have a far more regionalised approach. But with the new tender, is it likely to be on a regional basis, or is it likely to be on the numbers of individual patient basis, do you think?
So, there will be a mixture on that, and that's we have to determine what an optimum number of and at this your point of that some stage it does come down to hours as well, because if you have a particularly geographical area that has a high level of complexity, you might have 100 people that need 100 hours, you might need 100 people that need 400 hours. So that's the level of detail that we're kind of analysis that we're looking at, because it might be, it's not necessarily you would have the same blocks, 10 times X amount of hours or whatever. It might be 5 at this and 5 at that, and it will depend on the geographical size. I would suggest are not going to be the same. You might have one, because we maybe not have so many people down in Pontier. What does that block look like? And let's say I don't know at the moment. I'm really, we are speculating, but that's the kind of thing that we are working on. So what does an optimum look like? And it'd be really interesting to learn from who else has gone out to those contracts. So we know Monmouthshire's haven't listed it all in here, but yes, we close contact with Monmouthshire. Obviously the Gwynedd work. There is other providers, other local authorities that are going out for blocks and whatever. So we're all kind of sharing about what's working, what's not working. So, and I guess it's positive that we can learn from them at this stage. But certainly before, we also learned from our previous work. We had 4 blocks of 1,000 hours, not necessarily the right configuration. So things move on, things change.
Yes.
You said there may not be 4.
that's the point I was just making at this stage. I can't say. That's the work that we're going to need to do.
Oh, you're welcome. I think we've covered that question, Janet, really now, haven't we, in terms of potential financial implications on the providers. I think from the responses we've had, there's the potential for uplift in terms of the hourly rate. But as you said, there's going to be winners and losers under the new scheme. We may not have 14 service providers going forwards. It could be less service providers, but some may effectively end up with a bigger slice of the pie, subject to the tendering process. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, and what I would say, obviously, when you go out to tender, it's actually down to the provider to determine what price they're coming in at as well. But certainly as far as the ethical charter work, we do need to understand their costs a lot better anyway. But to say a tendering exercise and an hourly rate, sometimes they're different things because it's up to the provider to, they determine what rate they're coming in at.
Thank you very much, Jill. I think that takes into account all of the questions we had. I will open it up to elected members just to see if they wanted to add anything else. So I know Rose has left, so Fleish, let's start with you. Did you have anything?
Yeah, I just wondered, Jill, if you had a magic wand, would you get rid of all the, wanting different companies to come in and provide care and have it all in-house?
No. No, there is, again, the external providers, there's some fabulous carers there, and not everybody has to be 2p transferred into, a council organisation. It's about, as we're trying to do, it's about getting a different relationship and a more routine, it's about that mixed economy, and I think a mixed economy is right.
Add to that. The only thing I worried about that was when it goes to tender then, and you said about prices, does that sometimes those that bid, at the lowest, will they definitely get the contract?
The way that we've always done, the way that we tender, and that we always look at a percentage of price and percentage of quality. We never ever award a tender just based on price.
That's very reassuring.
Veronica, did you want to ask anything? No? Emma? No? Mike? No? Okay. It remains then for me to thank Jill for her valuable time today and candid and honest answers to the questions we've put to her, and it's very much appreciated. Thank you, Jill. Members will discuss what's come out of today's meeting now, and we'll try and come up with some notes and observations and some recommendations. So thank you very much.
So there's a few magic moments.
To the carers, I think, that do a good job on that.
Yeah, if you can note that, Bex, please. Okay, thank you very much, members. Appreciate everyone coming along today. We had a full house today. I'd like to take the opportunity to remind you that the scrutiny activity that we've been tasked with today, or invited to consider, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is the information contained in the report with specific regards to assessing, whether the ongoing development of the domiciliary care strategy will mitigate the risks associated with the supply and demand pressures in the domiciliary care market. Wow, there's a question. Are we in agreement? And to determine whether the strategy that's been proposed provides a strong enough platform upon which the enhancements to the in-house service can be built on, according to Cabinet recommendations, to a market share of 14% from 10%. Do we agree? And finally, make recommendations to the exec member for social care and housing on whether the strategy provides a clear direction to promote a different way of working, but within the private sector providers as partners in providing high quality, consistent but flexible care built around the needs of the individual. Can I please ask then if you have any particular recommendations that you'd like to put forward? Yes, Veronica.
Chair, I think the final recommendation is very relevant, but all of these hinge on finance. So we haven't got that magic ability to look into the future and be sure at this point in time that that money is going to be forthcoming. If and when it is, then this is definitely the way forward.
Thank you, Veronica. Yeah, I thought another good point that came out of today's meeting was about the mentoring. When we got new recruits starting, to put them working alongside an experienced person. I thought that was, and Jill commented on that as well, so I think that would probably be something that they would be receptive to, and we should definitely have in our recommendations. I do appreciate that this is all contingent upon funding. Do we agree it's the right approach to take, subject to the funding becoming available, that we move from the current system, which is task and finish, to moving towards patient-based, or what they're calling a patch-based outcomes? That's unanimous then from the committee backs.
I'm also glad that we are taking on this. We can, in June, following the consultations, that we are going to take on an apprentice. And I would like to think, if successful, that it can be done on an annual basis. I'm also very satisfied with the open day, activity day they had on the 24th, resulting in 11 new members of staff coming. And I was wondered if this could be done later in the year or on an annual basis, because it seemed really successful, and it enabled the process of people's commencing work far quicker than it has been done, which was a big issue amongst carers.
I totally agree with that. I think the Open Days was very successful. The formula, by having current staff members there being on hand to answer questions and explain the role more fully to the potential candidates, I think they're to be commended on adopting that approach. And it was very successful for recruiting 11 out of 38, and there's still potentially a few more. And I think it's a great initiative. And I do feel that there might be short-term pain in having to find 11 mentors and have everybody been inducted relatively at the same time. But I think medium term that's going to pay off big time, and it'll enhance the process rather than having 11 people starting, potentially 1 month apart, throughout the whole year. At least you can arrange an induction course as a block induction. So yeah, I think you're right that we should note that and suggest that they keep that approach as an ongoing approach.
Just as a rider to that, it's obvious from what we've been told about the number of staff that they lose, that this needs to be ongoing. It can't be just a 1 year. It can be difficult to manage when you've got, as you say, 11 coming in at once, but perhaps every 6 months they need to look and see what's required and then go about doing it again, because it's extremely useful. And I think it's probably will give the staff who are doing the mentoring more confidence as well, because it makes you start to think about your own role in a different light.
And I think the mentoring approach as well will help with the comments that have been made about the job is not what I thought it was going to be. I think if there's that mentoring early doors, then it should be conveyed to the new inductee, you know, all aspects of the role. I think one of the other factors that Mark brought up was important as well, which is the perceived lack of recognition by the people providing the care themselves and their perceived low status. And when he said that regionally there'd been an approach to recognise individuals for their approach and diligence that they've taken, perhaps that's something we should comment on as a committee and provide a recommendation around in terms of what could be done around perceived status and recognition. I don't know what other members feel about that.
Mark did say that they were going to have a day of achievement recognising volunteer care workers. Is this something that we could recommend our carers, our domiciliary care team? Because without those, this system, this facility wouldn't be ongoing. And in all fairness, a lot of them do more than just go out and make up tea. They are more than about the duty, and I think we should recognise that.
Recognition event. Okay.
I was only going to say, to sort of add on that, I think it would be great. In my mind, I've got this picture of sort of a call the midwife sort of patch, you know, where they've got a big board up, and the domiciliary carers are very much part of the team that's got the social worker and the OT and other professionals sitting in there, and even if they're not calling in that often, they know where the base is, they're part of the strategy, which I'm sure they are at the moment, but I think if they build on that, they build on their professionalism, don't they, as well, as being part of that team. And I've got this visual, happy sort of place in my mind. It wouldn't quite be like that, but I could imagine that. And I think we also need to be pushing that the rate of pay needs to go up, because that's what's going to make the difference to carers feeling professional. Don't know how easy that's going to be, but I think we should be lobbying for that, shouldn't we?
I think that's a difficult one to influence. Jill mentioned that the market rates were going up, the recommended rates would be going up, and she gave the exact figures, but obviously we can't interfere in that, because that would form part of the tendering process that the companies submit themselves to say what rate they're willing to provide their services for.
It also works on a regional level, so if we were to put up our pay for those, it would impact neighbouring authorities.
I do think the other point you made, Faye, is valid, though, in terms of, I know we're not as big as Powys and Gwynedd, but geographically, even though we're a relatively small ward, if you have localised service provision around centres, it's still going to help, because basically someone's not having to drive from the north end of the borough down to the south end of the borough to visit two different people in opposing ends of the borough, and effectively losing, you know, half an hour of their time going from one to the next, because that was a factor that had been mentioned, was the you know, almost like they're not, as part of task and finish model, they're not getting recognised and rewarded for the travel time between one and the next one.
This 15-minute visit that they got, you know, I think it's not fair on the carers anyway, you know. What can you do in 15 minutes, you know? That's the first opportunity they got, only 15 minutes. They can't make a cup of tea or do anything in 15 minutes, can they? So the thing that you were just talking about, I agree with, that keep them in the north and keep them in the, keep them on a basis like, where they can get to places.
Thank you for that, Mike. One would hope that under the new approach, if you move away totally from task and time, and you are legitimately focusing on patient outcomes, it should, I would hope, put the end to a 15-minute time limit on a visit. I know that they have to take into account the overall numbers of hours, as Jill mentioned, whether it's 100 hours or 400 hours or whatever, but it's been very difficult with the 15-minute window anyway, because, as was brought up earlier, they can sign off the timesheet to say that they're leaving and they've done everything, and they're just halfway out the door putting the coat on, and the person says, oh, just one more thing, and then they're stuck there for another 10 or 15 minutes after they've signed off the timesheet. So if we're going to move totally towards patient-orientated outcomes rather than task and time, I'm hoping that that would factor in looking at an appropriate amount of time to spend per visit.
Or not, it'll include the isolation and the loneliness part, when people only want a cup of tea or a chat, and they don't necessarily want anything practical done for them, because that's another big issue, as we brought up this morning, Alan spoke, but that perhaps one person might only see one of their domiciliary cares for 10 minutes, and they won't see anybody else for 24, 48 hours. So building in that approach to people is also necessary.
I think that comes back to the work that Molly's been doing and that she's fed through into the research and findings as well.
Veronica, you wanted to come in?
I think we have to remember that it's also quite difficult to often do that, because there's peaks and troughs with this in terms of through the 24-hour period, certainly the 12-hour period. We've all heard of the people who are given a cup of tea and a sandwich at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and put to bed. It's not easy, and with the shortages of staff, it doesn't help either. What we want to do is aim towards that. The nursing service have done it, and it works quite well. It's been done in small areas like Raglan and Monmouth, centre of Monmouth. So it is achievable, but there are constraints, and we need to be aware of those.
Bex, do you want to come in at this point with a summation and see if you picked up on some other things, and then I'll throw it back to the members again then to see if they've got anything else they want to add. Is that all right?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah. So I've got your recommendations that you agree, obviously, with those scrutiny activity dependent on the funding coming forward to achieve them. There was the recommendation on the mentoring, the one about the apprenticeships, if that is successful, to continue that annually, to commend them on that recruitment exercise and look to hold that potentially every 6 months to yearly going forward, and also the retention aspect of that. Look at a local recognition event. I didn't pick up any others then other than what you recommended other than when you...
Can I just add to that a note of thanks to both Mark and Molly, especially Molly, for the work that they've undertaken in assisting us with deriving the data and helping shape the new process.
And just that I'm assuming as a committee, obviously this is ongoing, that you would want to keep a view on this perhaps in 18 months' time when they're in a position to
Only one question, Chair, and that's just an observation. The caveat regarding the 200 hours, because you could read into that people were not having any care, but she's made it quite clear that there is care available and emergency care. No one is left without total care for that number of hours. It's just, the caveat of the wording of it, please.
Yeah, I think more so than a recommendation, that was just the way it was worded in the report. So I think she admitted that it was just the wording.
Anything else, members? Anyone else got anything, Faye?
I just wondered, is the training for all the carers in all the different groups standardised? And Is there a way that carers could be seen as senior carers and get more qualifications to make them feel, you know, I've done this for 10 years and I've done this training, that training, the next training, and be seen as like a senior carer? Would that sort of help the job satisfaction?
I don't know. I think we'd have to ask that because that didn't come up in the meeting. I think we can acknowledge and be thankful for the fact that funding has been available to assist with the new registration of new starters. I think we should acknowledge that, but perhaps also ask it as a further inquiry. It's not really a recommendation to the executive, though. It's more further information from Jill in terms of the career progression and advancement and recognition in terms of whether there is that framework in place for them to be able to progress from primary carer to senior carer or so on.
I mean, she did mention, obviously, with regards to the membership of the group, and when it came to things like training, they would co-opt someone on who was specialist in that area, so that may be a point then when they would pick something like that up. Yeah.
Veronica, did you have anything else? Emma? No. Mike? No. Janet? Okay. Well, if that's the case then, I'll hand over to Rebecca. She can give us the information on the item that's going to be considered at the next meeting of the Healthier Oversight and Scrutiny Committee, and that's going to be held on the Thursday the 5th of March, for those of you that have got diaries and calendars with you. Thank you, Bex.
Thank you, Chair. So just to highlight, members, you've selected at Visioning for the next meeting integrated wellbeing networks, and your key question looking at that item will be, is Torfaen well placed to meet the wellbeing outcomes of the community? So I've given you the first draft of the report pro forma, so if you could just take that away and give it some consideration, whether you think anything else needs to be added to the content of that report. And also, if there is anywhere you'd like to visit or any invitees you would like to come along to the meeting, if you could drop me an email and let me know, that would be great. Thank you.
I guess, Bex, you'll send out the recommendations to all members as per usual for any commentary and approval before they go.
Yep.
So with that then, I've got nothing further to do than thank you all for attending today and all your valuable contributions. I especially appreciate people that have had long-term experience of this and can bring their experience to this committee, and it's very valuable input. And thank you all, and thank you for contributing. I'll now officially, formally close the meeting. Thank you.